Every time the Georgia Bulldogs step on the field in 2024, they are going to have a distinct advantage over their opponent, regardless of who it is. The Dogs should dominate every team they play this year in one phase of the game. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight on this edition of the How About That Dogs Cast. There are 3 parts of any good football team. 4 if you count culture. Okay? Offense, defense, both of which we've taken a look at so far in our season preview series. Tonight, we're going to take a look at special teams, the part of the game that most people overlook, the part of the game that the casual fan is going to feel is not as important as them going to get their Coca-Cola or their hot dog or whatever it is when the special teams units trot out onto the field. That is not who tonight's episode is made for. Tonight's episode is made for those people who really want to understand exactly why the Dogs will have such an advantage in this phase of the game this season, or at least one quarter of the sport of football, just as important as the others. If you don't recognize how important special teams are in the game of football, I will merely simply direct you to go back to the Peach Bowl in 2021 or 22, and ask Ohio State how important special teams are. Ask LSU how important special teams are. The touchdown that Chris Smith had after the blocked field goal attempt in the SEC championship game was a huge momentum swing for the Dogs. So yes, tonight we're going to spend our time talking about special teams. Now, right off the top, as soon as spring practice was over, there was a change in special teams at the University of Georgia. Scott Sinclair, who had an on-field role with Kirby Smart for a couple of seasons as the special teams coordinator, decided he was going to pursue other opportunities and left the program. No problem. Just like Georgia has top flight recruits to take over when a player goes to the NFL or happens to go down to injury, Coach Smart stocks his building with coaches, graduate assistants, assistant coaches, consultants, analysts who can step in and fill a role if needed. And in this instance, that person is Kirk Benedict. He's been in the program for a couple of years working directly with special teams, and really not much is going to change as far as the focus of special teams. It is still going to be a priority on any Kirby Smart football team. That's why you see starters on Georgia special teams units routinely. It's also still going to continue to be a group effort in a lot of ways. Yes, Kirk Benedict is going to be the new special teams coordinator. He's going to hold that title and that role officially on the field. But just like it has been, it's going to be a group effort. There are always multiple coaches involved with coaching special teams at the University of Georgia. It's been that way the duration of Kirby Smart's tenure. I expect that it's going to be that way for the foreseeable future. So, once we understood that the leadership changed, but really nothing else is going to change, I decided to start taking a look at what the Dogs had coming back. Now, the one thing I want you to keep in mind as we roll through everything we're going to be talking about tonight is that Georgia, the reason I'm so bold is to say they are going to be better than everybody they play this season, at least during the regular season, which is all we can count on. I mean, we all have expectations that the season is going to be better than that, but all we can count on is the regular season. And Georgia should be better than every team they play when it comes to special teams in 2024. And a lot of that has to do with what I was just talking about. You've had players leave, you've had players transfer, you've had players go to the NFL, and yet Georgia's just going to replace those guys. I'm feeling pretty good about it. But where we have to begin is to assess what Georgia doesn't have right now. Gone are the days when you're going to see sure-handed Ladd McConkey trot back there to catch a punt. Whether he returns it or not doesn't matter. When 84 was back there, most all of us felt pretty doggone good about anything that was about to happen in the punt return game. We also lost last season's leading kick returner in Mekhi Muse. He was the hit of the 2023 G-Day game, flashed all over the place, earned himself some playing time, and after this season decided he wanted to transfer and hopefully for a better opportunity for himself, and he wound up at Houston. So in a couple of key places right there, punt returner and kick returner, the Dogs are going to be looking for new faces, but they are also going to be seeing some familiar faces. And we'll get to that in just a second. But to further hash this out for you, it wasn't just the return game that the Dogs are going to have some things happening. Unlike last season, this year, when the Dogs roll out onto the field in 24 to take on Clemson in game 1, they're going to have the same punter and the same starting kicker on the field to handle business. That would be Peyton Woodring and Brett Thorson. Now, Jared Zirkle was with the team, but he decided that he too wanted to leave the program and transfer. Zirkle has moved on to Texas A&M, and we wish him nothing but the best. But that means that Peyton Woodring is now going to handle both field goal kicking as well as kickoffs for the Dogs this season. Now, as we break it down and start to look at things a little bit more in depth, we should point out that Woodring was very highly recruited. He is an absolutely qualified kicker. And as the season went on last year, he proved it. He struggled early. He missed a couple of really makeable kicks early in the year in back-to-back games, but then he went on to hit 17 of his final 18 kicks over the course of the season. Now, it wasn't just that the Dogs lost Jared Zirkle and now everything falls on Peyton Woodring, but the other component of that battery in the special teams unit, the deep snapper, William Mote, he's moved on to the NFL. UCLA transfer Bo Gardner and redshirt freshman Will Snellings are probably going to handle the long snapping duties for the Dogs this year. And all of that's going to be very important because, like I said, we don't need a shaky start from a player who seemed to find his footing last year as the season went along. Woodring wound up, after that rough start, he got on a hot streak, and he wound up being a semifinalist for the Lou Groza Award, which is given to the best place kicker in the country over the course of a season. And he finished his season as a freshman All-America, one of 3 that the Dogs tallied in 2023. So there's no doubt that Peyton Woodring has what it takes to get the job done. The only question is, and again, I say the Dogs are going to have this advantage because when you look at who took home the hardware last year across the country in special teams, Graham Nicholson of Miami of Ohio won the Lou Groza. He is no longer kicking for the Red Hawks. Excuse me. Travis Hunter was your all-purpose player in special teams last season. He was an All-America. He plays for Colorado. I don't suspect the Dogs are going to see Colorado this season. I don't think the Buffaloes are going to make the playoffs. And when you look at the punting game, that would be Torrey Taylor out of Iowa was the best in the country. He took home the Ray Guy Award last year. So he's also out of eligibility. So these players are not only on Georgia's schedule, but they are also not going to be playing college football in 2024. So I'm supremely confident in saying not only is Georgia going to have the best special teams unit as a whole, we're going to talk about a lot of individual players, but I, as a whole, feel that the unit of special teams, punting, punt return, kickoff return, and everything else that's associated with the special teams games, it's all going to be, I'm sorry. I got distracted. Everything else is going to be going on with the Dogs this year in terms of special teams. They are going to have the best special teams unit as a whole that I think anybody in the country is going to have, and certainly anybody that they're going to play during the regular season. So moving right along, we've mentioned Peyton Woodring. He's going to be in consideration for all SEC honors this year, if not something more. Of course, it depends on how he performs. But on the other side of the special teams unit, the other face that you're definitely going to know, well, that would be Brett Thorson. Now, we've all seen Brett, especially if you're on social media. You know he's a good follow over on Twitter, and he even messes around with the podcasting world a little bit. And he is somebody that Georgia fans will probably always have a very special place in their heart for, because it was against Tennessee where THORSON struck what he admittedly considers to be his best punt so far, the one that wound up pinning the Volunteers back inside the 1 yard line. It was like a 75-yard kick or something. Completely flipped the field, led to a score. It led to a fumble and then a touchdown on the ensuing play. Should have been a safety. Wasn't ruled a safety. We're not here to argue that point. But Brett THORSON returns for the Dogs this year. And if you look at what he did last season, he averaged 43.8 yards per kick. He had 14 punts down to inside the 20 along with 2 touchbacks. He's absolutely going to be a favorite to be preseason All-SEC here inside the conference. And he should be on the Ray Guy Award watch list heading into this season. THORSON is also playing the role of mentor this year, because WOODRING had to take on some responsibilities last year as a freshman. And as the year came along, you could see that he got more confident, he got more comfortable, and it started to show up in his production on the field. And THORSON had a lot to do with that, saying, that he helped him out whenever he could and took him under his wing. So the Dogs, when it comes to kicking the pigskin, are in good shape here heading into 2024. Now, let's look at the other side. And this is the part that most everybody is probably going to be more excited about. And that would be who's going to be returning the football for Georgia here in 2024. And there are a list of names that we're going to run through here. But Mekhi Muse, as we mentioned, is no longer here. So your returning punt return leader is gone. When you look at kickoff returns, Mekhi Muse also led in that statistic. Not there. So who in the world are the Dogs going to turn to get the job done here in 2024? Well, the first name that jumps to my list, and you can see his name on the screen here now, is Anthony Evans. He only had 4 punt returns last year for 55 yards, but we all saw just how explosive this young man could be toward the end of the year. He had a huge 28-yard punt return against Alabama in the SEC championship game that led to a score for Georgia. I expect that he's going to get the first turn at returning punts for Georgia this year, and as long as he holds up his end of the bargain, catches the ball, does what he's told to do on any given punt return, and just lets his natural ability flash, I think Anthony Evans is going to be the guy that could really change the game for Georgia in terms of special teams here in 2024. Now, he's not going to be alone. There's another name out there, Michael Jackson III, who transferred in from USC, is going to be somebody who might get some consideration in this role. But I think if the coaches get what they want, they're going to see number 5 back there returning the majority of kicks for Georgia here in 2024. If we look at kick return, again, we've lost our leading kick returner from last year, and Michael Jackson could be somebody who fills one of those roles as well. He's a multi-purpose player. We don't know exactly how he's going to fit into the wide receiver rotation, but one thing is for sure is he is a value add when it comes to special teams, and he has some experience having played at USC. He was derailed by injuries a little bit. The Dogs aren't counting on him to be a number 1 guy, a plug-and-play guy right here, but he is going to add quality secondary options in both the punt return and the kickoff return game for Georgia. So if we're talking about the kick return game, I think we're absolutely going to see Dillon Bell back there because he is the Swiss Army knife for the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, the one way that we might not see much of 86 in the kick return game, and I would love to see him back there, but it's always a risk-reward sort of deal when it comes to special teams. It just is. It's a valuable part of the game. It can change the game. Kirby loves to put starters on these units. But you always have the choice to make. Do we want to risk it? How is our depth at the other position, that is normal position of wide receiver? How important is he over there? Can we afford to put him back, or do we have somebody else that can do the job just as well? Well, when we're talking about Dillon Bell, I think he's extremely good after contact, and he reads a broken field very, very well. So if he gets his turn in the kick return game, I think he will be extremely productive, because as we've seen how they use him in the offense on reverses, on sweeps, handing the ball to him out of the backfield, on the bubble screens, just get the ball in his hand and let him do work. I think that shows up really good in the special teams game. So it all comes down to what sort of risk reward the coaches are going to do with Dillon. But I do think he's going to be one of the primary considerations when it comes to kick return for the Dogs here in 24. And now we start to get into a list of potential playmakers for Georgia on special teams. We've already talked about Anthony Evans and Dillon Bell. But of course, you can't talk about this part of the game without mentioning Arian Smith. When you've got a burner back there like 11, you are so enticed. You so much want to give him an opportunity to see what he can do if he were to get into the open field. And there's one thing we know about Arian Smith. You can say he's had his injury issues. You can say he's had his confidence issues. He's been inconsistent. But the one thing about him is that he can flat go. And growing up a lifelong Raiders fan, when we talk about speed, well, I know all about it. You just can't teach it. And when you've got 4.2 the way 11 does, it is awfully, awfully enticing to find any and every way you can to get the football in his hands. So Arian Smith could be the guy who really breaks through this year, both at wide receiver and also on special teams. I think he's going to have his opportunity, and we're going to see it. We've already talked about Michael Jackson III, the transfer from USC. He could be a kick returner. He could be a punt returner. He's absolutely going to have the opportunity to impact the game for Georgia this fall. But there's also going to be a whole new crop of players that are going to have the opportunity to help Georgia. The one that jumps to everybody's mind, if you follow recruiting at all, is going to be KJ Bolden. The reports about KJ was not only was he the top safety in the country out of last year's recruiting class, some people said he was even better, more electric when he had the football in his hands, either as a wide receiver or as a kick returner, punt returner. He is a name that, whether or not it actually comes to fruition, is going to be considered for potentially as a kick returner or punt returner for the Dogs. You can't not think about him. His tape is just too good when you think about what he can do with the ball in his hands. He may or may not work himself into a starting position or a rotation at safety or star in the secondary, and that'll be great. And if he does, then maybe we're less likely to see him in the return game. But especially if he doesn't, this young man came to Georgia to play football. We know he's a competitor. We know he has skills with the football in his hands. I think you have to consider him as somebody that you might see on special teams for the Dogs this year. And so far, we've just been talking about guys with the ball in their hand. And if we're going to do that, we have to mention Nitro Tuggle, another true freshman. Now, the odds are a little longer that he's going to work his way onto the field in any of these roles this year. But because of how electric he is, because of his speed, because of his playmaking ability, I wouldn't be shocked to see it happen. I'll admit the odds are a little bit longer that he's going to be a guy that shows up on the field in the special teams return game for Georgia, but it could happen. And then, of course, there are other names like London Humphreys, the transfer in from Vanderbilt, who has wonderful straight line speed. I don't know if the kick return game is exactly what he's cut out for, but when you have that kind of speed, much like Arian Smith, he's a guy that you might have to consider. And here's the name that I'm sure everybody probably jumped to first off, and that would be Sokovie White. The one thing I feel really confident in saying about Sokovie is that he is going to play for Georgia this year on offense. He is going to see quality snaps at wide receiver for the Dogs in the regular season. I have zero doubt about that. He is just too good, too shifty in space, too good in and out of his breaks, too much of a competitor to not get on the field at wideout for Georgia this year. With all that said, he can do so much more if given an opportunity in the return game on special teams. Whether it is in the punt return game, which I think he would really be suited well for, or in the kick return game, which might be less advantageous for him than the punt return game, but I do think that he is going to take reps back there, at least in pregame warmups, somebody that could see the field in case of emergency, if you will, for Georgia when it comes to returning punts this year. Now, I know that we just ran through a lot of stuff right there, a lot of names and a lot of positions. We talked about the kickers with Peyton Woodring, how he's going to handle kickoff and extra points and field goals. We talked about Brett Thorson. We have a quality punter who is back there this year, who is going to do work for Georgia. I have no concerns about him. But while we're talking about those two, I do want to go ahead and throw out the names of the guys that you probably don't know that are going to be backing these dudes up. So at punter, we're talking about Noah Jones, who was with the program, has been in the program. He's going to be Thorson's backup should something happen to Brett. And then if you look at who's going to back up Peyton Woodring, there's a bit of a competition there between Liam Badger, Henry Bates, and Will Hadaway. They're going to battle that out. They'll figure out who the number 2 is. But for the most part, you should see 91 on the field for Georgia when it comes to kicking the football, either on kickoffs or extra points and field goals. Again, we touched on the long snapper, how they have to replace the catalyst to the battery there. William Mote has gone to the NFL. There are a couple of people there who are going to battle that out. Bo Gordon and redshirt freshman Will Snellings. Will Snellings could end up being really good for Georgia, but they did bring in Gardner as a transfer, so that means they think he is a quality player as well. I don't have any concerns. They'll sort all that out in fall camp, and I think the mechanization of getting the ball snapped and getting it up on kicks is going to be just fine in the end. I do expect Carson Beck is still going to be the holder, the primary holder, both because Woodring is used to him and he did the job last year. Georgia has a long history of having their starting quarterback do it, not because they're the starting quarterback, but because that's the person that the kicker is most comfortable with. So as long as Woodring is comfortable with Beck and Beck is healthy and doesn't mind doing it for whatever reason, then I would expect that to be the other part of the battery there in the kicking game. Now, we ran through this long list of players, and when I said that there are a lot of playmakers on the roster for Georgia, what I mean is not only the guys that are going to touch the football. There's only one football. Only one person can touch it at a time. So how are all of these other guys going to have an impact for Georgia here in 2024? You know the answer. When the Dogs have averaged a top 3 recruiting class over Kirby's duration in Athens, the one thing you know they have is players, and more specifically, Kirby Smart cannot get enough quality, athletic, defensive back type bodies or outside linebacker type bodies on his roster. You just cannot have enough of them. People get dinged up, hamstrings, things like that. But even when those guys are learning the ropes at their position, they are such good athletes and such good football players that they can immediately make an impact for the Dogs on special teams. That is where you are going to see these young players make an impact this year. Much like we saw Jonel Aguero, a 5-star player who was offered major NIL money to flip from Georgia and go to other schools, decided to stay at Georgia, learn his craft as a defensive back, and while he was learning, be an impact player for the Dogs on special teams. How did that show up? In 2023, Georgia only had 1 blocked punt. That came against Florida. Jonel Aguero is the guy who got it. He made an impact, helped Georgia win that game, and moreover, he, along with a host of other players who were also playing their roles in a team me mentality, Georgia allowed 0 punt return yards in 2023. I have looked. I can't confirm it, but I don't know that that's ever happened before. Football's been around a long time, but as long as we've been keeping records, I don't know if another team has gone an entire season without allowing a single punt return yard. That's what the Dogs did in that phase of the game in 2023. The reason they did that is because they have the wide receiver, the defensive back type bodies, the athletic linebacker type bodies, the running backs that are down the roster on the field, along with starters in select positions, playing on the special teams unit, and they take it seriously. They understand how valuable it is to the team. They understand that they can change the game on any play. And we saw that in 2023. We will see that in 2024. Again, you do not get the kind of recruiting classes that Georgia gets and then tell these kids you can't play anything. They are told, and it is drilled into them early on, just how important it is at Georgia to be good on special teams. And these young players buy into it. They show up, they do the work, and it shows up on the field, much like Janelle Aguero last year, much like Peyton Woodring as a freshman stepping in there, earning freshman All-America honors. Remember, Jalen Walker has spent time on special teams. Nick Chubb and Sony Michel spent time on special teams. Lorenzo Carter spent time on special teams. Jalen Carter spent time on special teams, blocking kicks, blocking field goals. Special teams have a special place in my heart. I want everyone to have a full appreciation of what it means to be a special teams starter at the University of Georgia, because that's what they say. That's how they pitch it. Special teams is not a field off somewhere else separate from the rest of the team. It has a point of pride in Georgia's practices. It is a period of focus. It is not an afterthought. If you play special teams for Georgia, you are a starter for the Georgia Bulldogs. And these true freshmen especially know that. And it is important to them to do what they need to do to get on the field as soon as possible. You get hunger and athletes put together, buying into a culture that are well coached. And what you end up with is that crazy stat like I just rolled out, where you don't allow a single punt return yard over the course of an entire SEC football season. It's almost unfathomable. Like, it's hard for me to get my head wrapped around it. But the one thing I know for sure is that it doesn't matter if we're talking about Texas or Alabama, or pick anybody else that you want to pick off of Georgia's schedule here in 24. The Dogs, when they take the field, have a distinct advantage in the division of the game that is special teams. Again, we can argue players here or there. This player's better, this kicker's better, whatever. I mean, as a unit, these Dogs are going to hunt when it comes to special teams in 2024. And I, for one, am going to be extremely excited. If the Dogs do not get at least a couple of blocked kicks this year, if the Dogs do not increase their average per return in the punt return game this year, I will be disappointed. I expect this unit to be a difference-making group of young men for Georgia heading into the 2024 season. One thing's for sure is that you guys are difference makers for me here on this channel and in this effort to bring you the best Georgia Bulldogs content I can possibly bring you. But as you can see, not everybody who watches my stuff and who enjoys what we're doing over here chooses to subscribe to the channel. It's like one of our longtime followers said last week in the chat, it costs you nothing and it helps me out tremendously. Go ahead, double check, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because sometimes YouTube loves you so much, they just offer up good Georgia stuff for you. But if you really like what we're doing, please double check, make sure you're subscribed. We would love to add you to the total, because we remain on the road to 10,000 subs here on YouTube. The Facebook page is growing, the Instagram page is growing, and YouTube is leading the way, and we want to keep it that way. We want to tell everybody that we know who loves Georgia to come on over here and hang out with us, not only on Wednesdays, but we love to have you here on Wednesdays for the live broadcast, but all the time, because we want to have the best, most vibrant, most loyal community here talking Georgia football on YouTube. That's what we're going for. Every time that Georgia steps on the football field in 2024, they are going to have the ability to dominate their opponent when it comes to special teams play. Individual players, we might be able to argue about who is a better kick returner, who is a better field goal kicker, who has a longer per punt average. But as a unit, because of the depth on the roster and because of the proven talent that we have handling the positions in the special teams area of football for the Dogs in 24, I don't see any team on the Georgia schedule that can compete with Georgia top to bottom when it comes to special teams. Just one part of the game for sure, but we've already talked about offense, defense, and now, having watched this, I hope you know a little bit more about what's going on with our special teams unit as we get ready to head into 24. But whatever you do, do not make the mistake of being one of those fans who decides to get up and go to the refrigerator every time the punt team or the punt return team, kick return team jogs out onto the field, because I believe that in 2024, you are going to run the risk of missing something truly explosive and exciting that we have not seen in Georgia in a few years. I think names like Anthony Evans, Dylan Bell, Michael Jackson, KJ Bolden, potentially, maybe even Dwight Phillips Jr. are going to show up on our screens or in our ears for the radio broadcast, doing some amazing things for the Dogs this year on special teams. And I cannot wait to see it. I don't want you to miss it. And when they read these names out to you, I want you to know exactly who they're talking about. Until then, y'all take care of yourselves, take care of your friends, take care of your families, and go Dogs!
Told him, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told him.